Hey everyone, and welcome to our first webinar of 2017. My name is John Feller. I'm an account manager here at YCharts, and today the subject of this webinar is earnings. And at the core of any valuation of a stock are the earnings of a company. So things we would like to know are, is the company we're looking at profitable or not? And when you're looking at these earnings, how often does this company beat their expectations, or do they sometimes fall short? So we'll answer some of these questions, and we'll take a look at a few other things as well. Today, my colleague Connie Dang, also account manager at YCharts, will present to us some of the key areas of YCharts that are vital if you look at the earnings of a company. So we're going to take a look at a few parts of YCharts today. First, we're going to look at what EPS data is available. So we're going to be looking at both historical and future projections of earnings. And other than the earnings per share data, we're going to dive into some unique features of YCharts that uses this data, and we'll see how we can use these several parts of YCharts together to analyze earnings. And remember, after the presentation, there will be a live Q&A section. You can always ask questions in the little questions box off to the right side, and someone should get back to you during the webinar, but if they don't, we'll likely address it in the Q&A session afterwards so everyone can hear the answer. Or if we don't get to your question in this session, then your account manager will reach out to you and give you an answer later on. Finally, there will also be a recording. It will be up on the support site with all of our other webinar recordings for you to watch at your leisure. So now I'm going to turn over to Connie Dang to get started with our earnings webinar.
Thanks, John, and thanks everybody for joining. Happy New Year. It's great to get our webinar series started again in January. So I'm going to take us out of here and over to my YCharts page. So as John mentioned, we're going to look at earnings today. This is going to be, of course, very equity focused. Earnings won't apply to funds or ETFs. So I'll assume that everyone here is looking at stocks. Really, earnings give us a true measure of the health of a company, and especially when we're talking about valuation and valuation multiples, earnings are going to be so important in determining how a company is valued in the market. We also hope, of course, given that we're coming into earnings season now, this will be an immediately relevant webinar for all of you, so you can take some of these practices from YCharts back into your own investment theses and apply them right away. So what I'm showing you right now is my YCharts dashboard page, and you can see my name up in the top right corner. And what we're going to focus on is actually just one of my top watch lists here. So I personally follow the financial sector pretty closely and have a watch list of a couple banks right here that I like to look at. Since I'm a little bit more familiar with these companies, I'm going to go ahead and just focus on these for the duration of our webinar today. And so a couple things from this watch list right here. You'll notice that there is an events tab, which we'll come back to, and that all of them are going to be bank stocks in the financial sector. For the sake of example, I'm just going to go ahead and pick the first one off of this alphabetically. So we're going to look at ASB, and this, what I'm going to show you for earnings applies to any stock in our database that you look at, no matter what sector it is, whether it's US or Canadian. And where we're going to start is on this data tab on the gray menu bar of our ticker homepage. So from the data tab, we can pull in the earnings view historically for any company. And so you'll notice I can type in earnings into this search bar, but also I can just type in EPS, and our smart auto search is going to know that they're the same thing, pull you the same metrics. I'm going to go ahead and pick normalized diluted EPS with a trailing 12-month look back. This is going to be the most commonly used measure of EPS. So again, our smart auto search will put it right at the top of these selections. Once I click into it, you'll see it'll give me the current value as well as the dates. Down the middle here, I'll get a chart over time of what this metric has looked like with the ability to change the timeline as well. And then, of course, to export the data, save the image itself or print it. And then going down a little further, the option to see actually all of the raw data for this metric, specify my own day range, and export it to Excel if I want to. Something you may not have noticed is that on each of these pages at the very bottom, we'll actually give you the definitions of each of these metrics with a link as well to learn more to get a full definition. As you may have noticed, when I was searching EPS and earnings in that drop down, there are a lot of different views, so this is a great way to just make sure you know exactly what you're looking at and that you're pulling the numbers that you want to see. I am going to just go ahead and type in EPS again up here so we can see what those choices look like and go through a really quick high-level explanation of what the biggest differences are. So as I mentioned, we're looking at the normalized diluted EPS, which shows up at the top of our search box because it's the most commonly used measure. In parentheses on each of these terms, you'll find the time period. So our TTM here will give us a trailing 12-month number. Our annual number will give us that fiscal year-end number you'll see in the 10K. And the quarterly number will give us fiscal quarters as you'll see them in the 10Qs. So when we look at EPS as the basic measure of earnings here, what do the qualifiers normalized and diluted mean? So normalized is going to refer to the actual line items that go into EPS. If earnings per share is normalized, that means that extraordinary one-time items are taken out of the calculation. This is what creates more of that smooth line that we see in the chart that's on this page. Actually allows us to really compare over time and see how consistent those earnings are without big one-time costs. The diluted part here refers to the number of shares that we're using to count this earnings per share number. So when we use a diluted measure, we'll look at all options that are outstanding on a stock, count all the ones that are in the money, and include those in our share counts when calculating the EPS. So you'll see there are a couple other options here, a lot of different combinations of how to put these together. A plain EPS diluted right underneath will give us that diluted share count, but will not take out one-time extraordinary items, whereas an EPS basic just means we'll use the basic share count, not including any of those options, whether they're in the money or not, in our share count. And if you have further questions about these, really recommend our financial glossary. As I showed you from that link, you can find not just a written explanation of these, but actually the complete formula that we use to calculate these, and these will follow generally accepted investing principles. So just to come back to this normalized diluted EPS page that we were looking at before, we're going to click into the full charts through this link right here in the top right. And as you'll notice, as I mentioned before, because this is normalized, we see a pretty smooth line over time so that we can estimate the path that this company has taken with earnings over time. We can change the date range up at the top. I'm going to condense it to a 3-year range just to get a better idea of what's been happening recently, and actually go in and add a couple metrics that'll help me also decide whether this past pattern could be sustained and slightly predictive of what earnings will be for ASB. So we actually have a pre-calculated metric called earnings surprise. And you'll notice again when I type this into the search box, we've got a lot of different ways to view this. I'm going to go with let's say quarterly EPS surprise. and then open my timeline back up so I can see what this looks like compared to what those actual numbers have been. And so what the earnings surprise is going to be the percentage difference between what Wall Street consensus estimates were for earnings for each of these quarters versus what the earnings actually ended up being. Here, if you'll take a look at the second y-axis on this chart, you'll see that our earnings surprise is pretty small, tends to be within 5% of what estimates were. So that tells us that our estimates usually are pretty predictive of what earnings are going to be. And so from here, if we can say that we think our estimates are going to be pretty well tuned, maybe we want to actually take a look at what the estimates are so we can start to think about whether this stock is a good value buy or not. So on this gray menu bar, here I've clicked into this page called Estimates. We've recently updated all of our estimates. They now come from S&P. So you'll find that they're very robust. We'll have more analysts covering each name, even slightly smaller names such as ASB than we did previously, as well as some additional detailed information, including the analyst coverage recommendations over on the right-hand side and a target price. You will notice on this page up in the top left corner, we can switch the periodicity of our estimates through this drop-down. So the default will be to look at them quarterly, but you can also switch them to annual if you'd like. And you might notice that all the EBITDA estimates are blanked out on ASB's page. I'll just put out a reminder that bank stocks do not report EBITDA. So if you're looking at any other sector, you will see these filled in, but for the particular example we're looking at today, we'll be limited just to straight EPS. And so we start with the current period up on top in the middle here. And as we scroll down, we'll be able to predict future periods as well. And again, these can all be charted. They can be brought into our different tools on YCharts. You can pull them as data metrics in your watch list. So now that we have sort of determined that our estimates are pretty predictive, this is going to be a useful page to really come to. On that note, as we scroll down, you'll also see a comparison to the prior period in case you want to come straight to this page without doing the charting analysis beforehand. It'll give you the actual numbers from the last reported quarter. And just keeping in mind that all of these numbers are going to be from what was reported. For example, right now companies are reporting those December 31st numbers, and even though the calendar date is past that, the last actual period is going to still be quarter 3 until those quarter 4 numbers are filed. You can see what the estimate was before the report, what the percentage surprise was compared to what it's been in the past, and at the very bottom of the page, we've pre-filled a couple of useful charts around estimates in a different format than the chart we took a look at earlier. These are going to be in bar chart format. And you'll see in the drop down here, you can choose between several different helpful measures. Then 2 line graphs of revision history and long-term revision trends. Again, just pre-filled. You're welcome to use this in any analysis that you would like, but you'll find this on every page just as a default. And so as we scroll back to the top of this estimates page again, we see on the right-hand side, there's a section for calendar items. It tells us when the next announcement will be and when the last announcement was so that we can know when these estimates become relevant. This is a really good place to find it on any particular stock. But we do also have an events calendar if you'd like to see this for the market overall rather than for just any stock in particular. So you'll find it up in our data section in the black menu bar, and you'll want to click into the heading Events Calendar. So we track 4 different kinds of events right now: earnings, dividends, splits, and spinoffs, and miscellaneous. Today we're going to focus on earnings. So as you can do on your own account as well, you can just go ahead and uncheck the other categories, which will change our events calendar just to show us earnings, which you can see in this type column right here. On the left-hand side, you'll see the calendar dates. It'll give you 1 week at a time to select what's coming up. For example, if I'm interested in seeing what earnings I need to be aware of tomorrow, I can just click on tomorrow's date. I'll reload my calendar and see that there are 37 companies reporting. You can also use this select a date calendar link to pick a particular date in the future instead of scrolling through week by week and day by day if you're looking for something further along in the future. So this events calendar does show a lot of different companies because it's going to be for the whole market. If you're really interested in seeing a particular list of companies, not the whole market, but not just one company's report date either, the best thing to do is to go back to our dashboard page. This is going to be the page that we started our webinar on, and actually make a watch list of the companies that you're interested in. So for example, as I mentioned, this is a watch list I've had for a long time because they're names that I follow, and just when I want to know when their earnings are coming out, I can click into the events tab within the watch list itself and see the events that are coming up for just these companies without having to see everything else as well. And again, there are a lot of earnings coming up right now because it's earnings season, but if there were other events in here that I didn't want to see, I would simply uncheck them the same way I did in the events calendar. You'll notice within the watch list events tab, all of the events up at the top in blue are going to be upcoming, and those that are in white at the bottom are historical and have already happened. Couple more interesting things. If you want to take an even deeper dive into these earnings or into particular filings when they become relevant, we provide links directly to investor relations pages. I'm going to click back into ASB's ticker homepage to show you where this link is. As we scroll down the right-hand side of information, you'll notice in the profile section, we provide a direct link to the investor relations URL. So if I open this up from my YCharts page, it'll take me directly to Associated Bank's IR page. From here, you can pull in webcasts, presentations, any press releases that are put out, earnings calls, etc., and even take direct links to SEC filings or whatever you may be looking for that come directly from the company. I'll go back to that ticker homepage and scroll a little bit further down the right-hand side. I'll also just point out under this heading, Other Resources, we've got direct links to 13F filings, call transcripts, SEC filings, and etc. So if you're looking for further information and to go even deeper to audit what we have on the site, you don't need to go off and Google it. You can get there directly from our own pages. And then the last piece I want to really show on our earnings that is a little bit newer is some of our new metric codes for Excel. So as you guys know, I've shown you a couple different places where you can export this data out to Excel, but many of you are also using our Excel add-in to import. I'm going to show you a version of our Excel reference guide that I've pre-highlighted with some of our newer EPS metrics. And you can find any of these on our complete reference guide for metric codes. The best thing to do is just to Control F and search for EPS or earnings. You'll notice the regular EPS numbers, of course, are available. Our estimates, as well as that earnings surprise number that I showed you earlier. And as I scroll down this document, you'll see in this highlighted section here really how many different views of earnings per share we have. And so just letting you know that all of this is available for you to pull directly into Excel and to do further analysis with. Another overlooked piece of our Excel metric codes is really the qualitative information as well. So you'll find this on a second tab within our complete reference guide, and you'll see you can pull into your Excel spreadsheets some of the pieces I showed online as well, such as the investor relations URL. If you're making a stock one-pager, if you're making an info sheet, if that's just a useful link to have to come out directly from Excel. You can pull dates, as you saw, similar to that events calendar, but again, directly into your spreadsheets. Pull the last earnings release, the last fiscal quarter end dates, the last fiscal year end date, and the next earnings release. So that's going to conclude the lecture portion of our webinar today. Thank you all for listening in, and I hope that was helpful and you'll be able to utilize that immediately as we go into earnings reporting season. We've had a lot of really good questions come in throughout the webinar, and John has been actually answering some of them online and then aggregating the ones that came in most. So I'm going to hand it over to John for our Q&A.
Yep, thank you very much for that, Connie. I hope that was very informative on how to pull up different earnings per share information on YCharts. We did get a few questions coming through in that little questions box. So I'm going to switch over to my screen so that we can go through a few of these. One question we received was in regards to the S&P 500 earnings per share and how to find that on YCharts. And it's interesting because what Connie went through today was going through individual companies, and we could go into this data tab to find the earnings per share. But since the S&P 500 is an index, we have it in a different section on the site. So to find the earnings per share, you can go up in the very top search box. I'm just going to type in S&P 500 and earnings. And we will have a number of different earnings per share options, kind of like what it would be for a company as well. I would say the most commonly used one would be this S&P 500 earnings per share trailing 12 months. So we can click into this metric, and then here we'll have the S&P 500 earnings per share over time. So if you also wanted to see this information on a much larger chart, you can just click right in here. We'll come to our regular chart page, and then and just for example, we can pull in the full S&P 500 and show you that difference over time. So we can pull this into the charts. Just remember, all you really need to do is type in S&P 500 earnings per share in either the security search box or up here at the top, and then we'll be able to find that on YCharts. Another question we received during Connie's presentation is how long does it take for earnings to appear on YCharts? And that is a good question. Usually, if the company is in the S&P 500, so we're talking some of the largest companies in the United States, those ones will have their earnings information in YCharts within 24 hours. Otherwise, if they're smaller companies, maybe outside the S&P 500, it can take up to 48, but generally it will take about 24 hours. If you are looking for information as soon as a company releases their earnings, we will have information about that as well. You don't have to wait necessarily 24 hours. So I know JP Morgan announced not too long ago, so if you wanted to, we can go to the news tab. And say if we're looking at this after hours and they just reported, this is a live news feed, so we'll be able to see articles coming in here about what their actual earnings were, what the estimates were, and give you that whole look on this one page. Otherwise, if you wanted to wait the 24 hours, if that, especially for JP Morgan, you'll see their financials in the financials tab. And one other question was about that Excel reference document that Connie went through and how exactly to find that on YCharts. So to get there, we can go up to the Tools menu at the top, click on Excel, and then up here at the very top we'll have this reference guide section. So we'll have a few different guides on this page, and this is the very last one, this complete reference of metric codes. This document's updated every day as soon as we add more metrics to the site, so you're always going to be getting the most up-to-date complete guide of everything we have on YCharts. The last question that we received today was about earnings per share versus EBITDA. So in this case, I'm actually going to go back to JP Morgan to give you an example. And I think this likely showed up when Connie was typing in earnings on this data page. So you'll notice that if we just type in earnings here, you'll find both earnings per share and EBITDA will start showing up here toward the bottom. And the reason is because both of these acronyms have earnings in the title. So EBITDA is just earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So if you want to get some more information about EBITDA, I would suggest we do have a fairly extensive financial glossary that we can look for. And if we just search in the glossary, we should be able to find our article about EBITDA. So here will be the full definition about EBITDA, and you can compare this to the earnings per share or really any other part of YCharts. But obviously, if you do have more questions about this, or if anything else came up through the webinar that you have questions about, definitely let us know. We're happy to help out, make sure that you're finding all the data that you need. So that would conclude this webinar. Really appreciate you watching today. If we didn't get back to your question at all right now, your account manager will reach back out to you, and we will see you in February when we have our next webinar. Thank you.